It started with a phone call that sounded like a tragic accident. A man named Keith Johansson, clearly shaken, called 911 from his home in Florida on the morning of April 7, 2018. He told dispatch, "I think my wife accidentally shot herself. She's gone. Oh God." You could hear the panic in his voice, but then, something felt off. He wasn't just emotional, he was scattered. Talking about slipping on the wooden floors. Saying he couldn't apply pressure to the wound. Worrying about guns going off around him, Keith told dispatchers he was in the shower when he heard what sounded like a balloon pop, then another louder bang. He ran out and found his wife Brandy on the floor, bleeding from the chest. 2 handguns lying next to her. According to him, it had all been a horrible accident, but that was just the beginning. By the time police arrived at 23 Felter Lane, they were already skeptical. Officers walked into a chaotic scene. Brandy Johansson, just 25 years old, was lying between the bed and the nightstand, lifeless. She had 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. And curiously, 2 9mm handguns were placed near her body. Not scattered. Not dropped. Just oddly positioned. Facing each other, Keith was on the porch, his 6-year-old son Rylan close by, as officers broke the terrible news Brandy was gone, and Keith? He broke down. Sobbing, screaming, "She's gone. Oh God, shut up, shut up, shut up." His emotions felt raw. But not everyone was convinced. Here's why. While Keith was giving his statement, officers noted he didn't look like someone who had just gotten out of a shower. His hair wasn't wet, his body wasn't damp. In fact, he looked dry. That might sound minor, but when you're trying to confirm a timeline, every detail matters. He told police he was in the shower for maybe 5 minutes. He heard 2 bangs, he thought they were balloons. Then he ran out and saw Brandy. He also insisted there had been no arguments that morning. No tension. Just a normal start to the day. Coffee. Shower. That's it. But as investigators began walking through the house and documenting the scene, they saw things that didn't make sense. Like how the 2 guns were lying together. How Brandy had been shot twice, but the wounds didn't match being fired from the same weapon. And why would she accidentally shoot herself twice in the chest? That question hangs in the air. Keith also kept saying things that felt more rehearsed than spontaneous. When asked how things were between him and Brandy, he said they were perfect. That they never fought. That she was everything I wanted her to be. He told police, "I just want to get this all over with so I can start to grieve." But that line rubs the detectives the wrong way. Most people don't think that far ahead, not in the middle of raw shock and trauma. Detectives decided to bring Keith in for questioning. Not because they had proof of anything yet, but because something wasn't sitting right. The call. The positioning of the guns. The way Keith was reacting. It all added up to suspicion. Even if there wasn't hard evidence, at the same time, investigators also began learning more about Brandy herself. She had been married to Keith just a year earlier, in 2018. They had fallen in love back in 2014, and eventually settled down with Brandy's son Ryland. From the outside, it looked like a happy family, but Brandy had been isolated. She didn't work, Keith didn't want her to. She spent her days focused on Ryland. Meanwhile, Keith was unemployed, living off a lump sum injury settlement. Money wasn't abundant, but they got by. In the interview room, Keith painted a glowing picture of their relationship. Said they had arguments like every couple, but never anything crazy or violent. He even admitted Brandy had flirted online. Sent some messages, maybe even a provocative video. But he brushed it off. She did it for fun, he said. Nothing physical. But when police brought in a child forensic specialist to speak with Ryland, the boy gave them something unexpected. He said, "My mother screamed. Then I heard 2 gunshots." That one sentence changed everything. He said his mother had screamed before the shots. Not after. Not during. Before. That doesn't line up with an accidental shooting. Screaming before being shot? That suggests fear. That suggests awareness. Ryland also told the interviewer that his dad had told him what to say. That Brandy shot herself. That no one else was in the room. That it was all her. When investigators brought that back to Keith, he denied it immediately. Screamed? "I didn't hear a scream," Keith said. Why would he make that up? He then tried to undercut his son's credibility. Said Ryland lies a lot. That he's told stories before. But when asked if Ryland had ever lied about hearing his mother scream in the past, Keith said no. The tension in the interview room was rising. Keith was trying to keep the story together, but cracks were forming. At one point, detectives asked about surveillance cameras. The house had several. Indoors. Outdoors. One in almost every room. But Keith said the bedroom didn't have one and that the rest were offline because the batteries had died. Convenient, he said. I wish they had been on, because it would have clarified a lot. But when officers reviewed body cam footage from the scene, they noticed something curious. Keith had been obsessively checking his phone as if he was doing something, possibly deleting footage or remotely accessing camera data. The more they talked to Keith, the more defensive he got. "I feel like you're trying to pin this on me," he said. "This was an accident. This is what I saw. This is what I heard." The detectives, trying to break through the wall, said it plainly. "Keith, if something different happened, now's the time to tell us." Keith stood firm. "I didn't do it. If I did, I'd own it." But they weren't done. As the question continued, Keith's answers didn't get clearer, they got more frustrating. He said he didn't hear Brandy scream, that Ryland must have lied or imagined it. But detectives weren't buying it. Something about the entire morning just didn't sit right. Keith said he was in the shower. But he was dry. He said he slipped on the floor, but his clothes weren't wet. He said he couldn't reach Brandy because of the risk of setting off one of the guns, but then how did he know where the guns were, or how close she was? He was tying himself in knots, and the more he talked, the more his inconsistencies piled up, but the detectives weren't just relying on what he said. They knew the house had surveillance cameras. And while Keith insisted the cameras were all offline, they weren't ready to take his word for it. When asked directly about the footage, Keith claimed not to know where the recordings were stored, or even how to access them. And yet, at the crime scene, he'd been glued to his phone. Not texting family. Not crying. Not calling for help. Just quietly tapping. To detectives, that behavior didn't scream grief. It screams cover up, and then, things took another turn. Because while Keith continued to deflect, the police were already working on recovering any data from the surveillance system. Hard drives, cloud backups, anything that might show what had really happened inside that house. Meanwhile, the autopsy report came back. Brandy had been shot twice in the chest. The first shot? A rubber bullet. The second? A standard 9mm round that went through her chest and struck the nightstand. That detail changed everything. Rubber bullets aren't used in home defense casually. They're non-lethal, intended to hurt or disable someone without killing them. Police sometimes use them for crowd control. But in a personal firearm, detectives were baffled. Why would someone load a gun with both rubber and real bullets? When they asked Keith, his answer made the room go quiet. He said he regularly loaded his guns this way: 2 rubber bullets first, followed by lethal rounds. Just in case, he said. I don't want to kill anyone. I just want to stop them. That explanation might have made some kind of twisted sense if they were dealing with a stranger. An intruder. But this was his wife. And this was supposed to be an accident, and then the detectives got the break they were waiting for. About 3 weeks after the shooting, they managed to recover footage from the surveillance cameras. And what they saw on those recordings stunned even the most seasoned officers. The footage began the night of April 5, 2 days before the murder. Keith and Brandy were in their bedroom. The vibe? Nothing short of toxic. Keith was chain-smoking, pacing the room, and verbally attacking Brandy over and over again. His voice was sharp, bitter, dripping with rage. "You think I'm stupid?" he snorted. "You think I don't know you're cheating?" Brandy, quiet, sat on the bed. Crying. Looking away. Trying not to react, Keith ramped it up. "Put fish hooks in that, it's worthless now," he asserted. "I'm going to kill you and go back. You know what I mean? I'm not scared." He called her names. Accused her of being a liar. A scumbag. A cheater. He threatens her life repeatedly. "Maybe I'll make you take some sleeping pills and cut it off quickly." At one point, he walked over to a drawer and pulled out a rifle. He didn't aim it. But he didn't need to. The threat was in the gesture. "You drove me to think about it, man," he mumbled. The hours-long verbal assault was hard to watch. Even the detectives, people who'd seen all kinds of disturbing footage, said it was some of the most chilling behavior they'd ever witnessed on video. And then, at some point, Keith noticed the camera. He reached up, pulled it from its place in the corner, and turned it off. But what he didn't know was that another camera in the hallway had kept recording. And what it catches next will become the final nail in the coffin. On April 7th, the day of the shooting, Brandy is seen on camera in the hallway. She's hugging her son Ryland. Telling him she loves him. Calm. Warm. Just. Being a mom. That was the last time Brandy Johansson will ever be seen alive. Minutes later, the camera caught Keith sprinting out of the bedroom, not to get help, but to grab his jeans, stuff them with something, and start hiding drugs around the house. He then made the 911 call, standing next to Brandy's body. "Stay with me, babe. Stay with us," he said to the dispatcher. But the video shows the truth. Keith wasn't focused on Brandy. He wasn't trying to save her. He was preparing the house for when the police arrived. Making sure his drugs wouldn't be found. By the time the footage was reviewed, the entire story Keith had spun had completely unraveled. There was no intruder. No accidents. No 2 rubber bullets just happened to go off. This was deliberate. Calculated. Cruel. Keith Johansson was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, but the bizarre twists didn't stop there. After the footage surfaced, Keith Johansson was taken into custody. The evidence was overwhelming. The verbal threats. The emotional abuse. The calculated effort to hide drugs instead of helping his dying wife. It all painted a picture far removed from the grieving husband he tried so hard to portray, but in jail, Keith didn't stay quiet. In fact, he started changing his story again. At first, he mentioned Brandy had been shot by a neighbor. Yes, a neighbor, someone just accidentally broke in and killed his wife. That excuse didn't last long. Then he told a different story. A much more disturbing one. He said maybe it had been Ryland. His 6-year-old son. Maybe Ryland got a hold of the gun. Maybe he shot Brandy. Even Keith's parents, who had supported him through most of the chaos, were horrified. On a call from jail, Keith told his father, "What if it was him?" His dad paused. "Keith. He's a little boy." All his father could say was, "Just be honest." But Keith didn't know how to do that. Even as the walls closed in, he clung to denial. He also had a history of mental illness, including paranoia and delusional thinking. He was known for being overly suspicious and always armed. Friends said he was controlling, especially with Brandy. And when you look at the footage, that dynamic is clear. Keith didn't just want to be in charge. He wanted power. He wanted control. He wanted Brandy to fear him, and on April 7, 2018, he made sure she did right before he took her life. As the trial approached, the prosecution was ready. They had the video, the audio, the gun evidence, the 911 calls, the autopsy report. Ryland's heartbreaking statement. Their strategy was simple: show the jury that every word Keith said was a lie, and that Brandy's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a pattern that ended in murder. But the defense? They tried to flip the narrative. They said Brandy was unstable, that she was a heroin addict, that she was the abusive one, that Keith killed her in self-defense. It was a bold strategy, and one that required jurors to believe everything on the surveillance footage was either misunderstood or irrelevant. But the prosecution pushed back hard. They showed the video of Keith screaming at Brandy, calling her names, threatening to kill her, telling her she deserved it. They showed how, after the shooting, instead of helping her, he hid narcotics. They showed his lies, one after another. He said he was wet from the shower. He wasn't. He said the cameras didn't work. They did. He said Brandy shot herself twice. The evidence said otherwise. On the stand, the prosecutor asked him bluntly, "You told detectives you were flying around on the floor and couldn't get to her. That was a lie, wasn't it?" Keith replied, "Well, I was a little bit wet. But yeah, that was a lie. You told them there were no working cameras in the house. That was a lie too, right?" Keith hesitated. "Yeah." One by one, every thread of his story unraveled. Eventually, the jury saw through it all. The verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. And in the state of Florida, that means one thing: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Brandy's family, the sentence was justice, but it was also a wound that will never fully heal. Her sister said watching the footage of Keith belittling Brandy was unbearable. She said, "I just wanted to get up and hug her." This wasn't just about a murder. It was about control. About emotional and psychological abuse that went unrecognized for years. About a young mother who tried to keep her family together and paid the ultimate price for it. Keith thought he had created the perfect narrative. He played the grieving husband, called 911, cried for the cameras. But behind the scenes, he was just another abuser using fear and manipulation to control someone until he finally snapped. Brandy's death wasn't a mystery. It was a slow-building tragedy, hiding in plain sight, and the saddest part? It could have been stopped. If you or someone you know is in a relationship where fear, threats, or control have become normal, that's not love. That's abuse. And there's help. No one should live in fear of the person they share a home with. Brandy's story is heartbreaking. But it's also a reminder: the truth always finds a way to come out. No matter how tightly it's buried. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, or you want to see more cases like it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We post new deep dive documentaries every week. Take care of yourselves and each other.